Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Did the wife accept the role because of her personal desires or not? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Everyone thinks I'm the human version of a bulldog. I am very straightforward, and when I take on something, people compare it to a bulldog's teeth on a throat. I don't let go, and I don't give up. I follow every action to its logical conclusion. Many people think that I'm my mother's luckiest son in the world, but in fact, I am simply always ready. In everything I do, I try to be as prepared as possible so that everything ends well for me. I'm more of a wolf in bulldog skin because I sniff out everything from all angles to identify any weak points in a business or person. Never underestimate the value of research, whether personally or professionally. I explore all available options before deciding on a course of action. This is one of the many reasons why I have a successful business. If I get a new supplier or client, I find out everything I can about them and don't take anything for granted. They may look good on paper, but if I dig deeper, I may find out that they are in the middle of a messy divorce where their company may be compromised, or perhaps they filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago in another state. Some may be involved in affairs with members of both sexes and not be particularly discreet, or they may associate with people of questionable character, which could negatively affect their business, and in turn, affect mine. I'm something of a venture capitalist, which could be called a form of legal usury if you wanted to put it in a bad way. I've saved some money in my life and managed to increase it significantly by investing wisely in people I trusted. I'm not infallible, some things don't work out, but my success rate is about 80%, so I can afford to take a loss and move on. It's often an experience that gives me a better understanding of the next deal. I am widely versatile and have my fingers in many things. I had a friend who was an amazing trainer with several degrees in physical therapy and sports medicine. She was very good at her job, but she had no business sense at all. When she approached me about starting her own business, I looked into it with my usual fanaticism and dragged her along. She learned a lot in a short time about how our industry works, and we eventually agreed that it was a viable opportunity, so I set it up. When I started, I owned 60%, but was not actively involved except in the business aspects, and each contract had a standard buyout option that allowed the minority owner to buy me out within 5 to 10 years. There was also a clause in the contract that if the business started to fail, I would step in, analyze the data, and decide whether to take over or close it down. I had to do this 3 times, and each time it was perceived as a personal insult. I invested in an ad agency early on, and it was very successful. They were approached by big players who wanted to buy them out and make them work for their organization. Bob Ongen called me for help, and we reviewed the offer. It was attractive, but I showed them that as their reputation grew, they could be bigger than the company trying to buy them out in 15 years. They turned down the offer, and it was very beneficial for me over the years. I still own 20% through a structured buyout program that will make it completely independent in 4 years. My usual practice was to use those I had worked with previously to help make my new investments successful. Bob developed an elaborate campaign for Jody's rehab clinic, and within 2 years, it had become a franchise and now has offices in every southern state and parts of the Midwest. I own a small portion of each because she insisted it makes her feel more secure. The man who put me on the path I was on was an old trader who liked to go undercover. Over the course of his life, he probably paid about 20% of the taxes he actually owed and got away with it. I wasn't that bold, and my deals were pretty straightforward and transparent. In addition, with the advent of computers, it has become much more difficult to hide anything from the tax men. This was the reason why Great Uncle Harry avoided technology like the plague. There was a scandal at an accounting firm in my city. It turns out that no one was watching how they looked after other people's money, and they took advantage of this, appropriating $12 million for themselves. They got caught, and the owners went to jail, but the money was never found. This interested me, so I bought the business for next to nothing. The old owners were desperate for money for lawyers, so they made no profit. I retained 3 junior accountants who were not involved and slowly grew the business. Their main job was to ensure that the companies I invested in were clean and to provide expert advice when needed, which was usually from me. I changed the name, and the guys I hired were good. They managed to get about 25% of their old clients back who weren't affected by the theft, so revenue started to grow pretty decently. I offered the 3 original accountants a buyout deal, which they happily accepted, 6% a year for 10 years. They still had 7 years left. By this time, I was 32 years old and fairly happy with all aspects of my life, except one. I was lonely. I dated a lot but never found the one. Uncle Harry's wife got tired of his numerous affairs and gave him hell during the divorce. She seemed to know a lot more about his business than he thought. When she finished with him, the tax office appeared on his doorstep. The only thing that kept him out of jail was me. He was a hair's breadth away from prison, but he had to pay an estimated $214,000 in fines and taxes. If he could do this, he would be left alone for 3 years on probation. He had money but couldn't explain where it came from, so I lent it to him. It put me under a microscope, but my transparent methods worked. Harry paid me back at a pre-agreed rate from his salary as one of my warehouse managers, plus twice as much under the table. By the end of the probationary period, he will have paid me every last penny. My great-grandmother acted out of anger and pain, but it made me realize I needed to figure things out if I ever found a woman I loved enough to marry. The prenuptial agreement was clear, and I would have made sure that if either party cheated, the consequences would be quite severe. I even discussed this with my lawyer, and he laid the groundwork, the details of which would be worked out when the time came. As an only child of parents who never had deep family connections, I felt mostly alone in the world. This made me really want to have a big family. I wanted at least 3 children, and if one of them came with the mother, I would consider that a bonus. I was young, good-looking, and had enough money to date at a high level. I've had 2 pretty serious relationships in my life. One was going well until she started hinting at commitment. When I explained to her that she would have to sign a prenuptial agreement, she refused, saying that we were in love and would be together forever. When that didn't work, she turned into a shrewish woman of epic proportions. We just gradually drifted apart. 6 months later, she married a rising businessman from an old money family. 6 months after that, they found themselves in divorce court, and she was trying to squeeze every penny out of him. She was partially successful, receiving almost all of what he had saved, but the family money was locked up in a trust, and she had no chance of getting it. He almost had to close his little company until I intervened. 3 years later, he was worth much more than when he was married, engaged to a very nice young woman with a child from a previous marriage who seemed to love him more than her mother did. They were choosing a house, which I arranged through one of the 2 real estate agencies in which I had interests. During the same time, his first wife married and divorced twice more, gaining very little from each failed marriage. I saw her one day at lunch, and she blamed me for all her problems. I just grinned and said, "I'm not the cause of all your problems, darling, only the big ones. The rest is on you." It was nonsense, of course, but she believed it. I was frustrated in my search for love, so I retreated. Love crashed into me in the hallway of an advertising agency. I was a pretty big guy, and she was a fragile woman. I later learned that she was only 5 feet tall and weighed 90 pounds when we met. After I helped her up, admiring her legs, I apologized and introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Roy. Nice to meet you." She restrained the harsh answer that was on her lips and looked at me more carefully. I smiled at her with my I mean no harm smile, and she sighed. "I should have watched where I was going," she said. "Sorry, it's no big deal. Are you okay?" I replied. "As good as you can get after bouncing off a stone wall." "Let me guess, do you train a lot?" she asked. Frankly, I was in good shape thanks to Jody. She wrote out my menu and exercise schedule and frowned at me when I deviated from the course. I liked craft beers, though most of them were terrible because brewers made the most common mistake, thinking that a higher alcohol percentage meant a better beer. Many understood this, but some did not, and they couldn't resist. I funded my favorite brewer's startup after he let me try what he was making at home. At first, he was afraid, but we guided him. Accountants kept an eye on his finances. The advertising guys ran a viral campaign plus billboards and ads in local and state magazines. Demand was higher than his production, but it was limited by fairly strict restrictions, the result of a powerful lobby sponsored by the big players. Some even tried to pass off part of their products as microbrews but were quickly exposed. I was one of his focus groups, and his opinion meant a lot to me. I smiled at her a little. I wouldn't say I'm a rock. She involuntarily rubbed her butt. The expression knocked down no longer seemed like just a phrase. That's exactly how it felt to me. It's so interesting to meet you, but I have to get back to work. We parted, and I wondered what she was doing. Jan told me she was a new employee, fresh out of college with a master's degree and boundless enthusiasm. I saw her a few more times when I came to the office. When we exchanged names, we barely managed to stop ourselves from laughing. My name was Roy McCoy, and hers was Jimmy Cho. No relation, she said, and I don't think his shoes are worth the money. We had coffee a couple of times, followed by a few lunches, before we went on our actual date. We were examined a bit by other customers at a really nice restaurant where I invited her. I was over 6 feet tall and quite large, thanks to Jody, and she was a petite Oriental beauty who was a foot shorter than me. I never told her that I financed this restaurant, but it was doing very well. Jimmy was half Korean and half Japanese and, in my opinion, inherited the best physical features of both nationalities. She revealed that there was a lot of animosity between the two countries dating back to before World War II due to the many atrocities the Japanese committed against the Koreans, which prompted her parents to move to North America. She grew up mostly in Canada and only moved here 4 years ago. There was still a Canadian influence in her accent, which was quite endearing. I told her my story, born and raised here, 1 year of community college before I dropped out, and an inheritance from a great-grandmother whose existence I didn't even know about gave me the initial capital to start my business. I could see she was impressed. Wow, you must be very smart. I smiled. Not really. I just got some good advice from a very successful man. He told me that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, you just have to be smart enough to figure out who's the smartest and use their intelligence. Most geniuses aren't very good at business, that's where I fit in. You must be very successful, she said. I thought about my failures. Sometimes, I've fallen on my butt, but I count every failure as a learning experience. Then I made her laugh until she cried by telling her about some of my failures. Did you really think this was a good idea? She asked. Not now, but at the time, it seemed like it made sense, I replied. We spent a pleasant evening just getting to know each other. After dinner, I took her to a performance by a local amateur theater group. They were pretty good and played a stage version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The actors and audience kept the atmosphere lively by shouting "fool" at Brad's character at various points, and when the scene came where Dr. Frankenfurter asked Brad about tattoos, one audience member shouted, "Fools don't have tattoos." The actor playing the doctor looked at the audience and grinned, "Mine has it." Jimmy couldn't restrain herself and laughed so hard that she began to have hiccups. I was a sponsor and talked to everyone at the post-show meeting, and Jimmy struck up conversations with a lot of the cast. The woman who played Janet was still wearing her bra and slip and struck up a conversation with her. "Aren't you uncomfortable in just your underwear?" Jimmy asked. Celeste, the actress, smiled. "No, honey, I like it. I have pretty nice breasts, and I like to show them off. You should see our vacation photos. What does your husband say?" Just then, her husband Jack appeared next to her, still in his boxer shorts. He played Brad in the production. I smiled when I saw how Jimmy's eyes slid towards his groin. Let's just say Jack didn't need to stuff his shorts. They had been married for 5 years and were devoted to each other, although after a late night and 2 bottles of wine, they both told me they were adventurous and wouldn't mind playing with discreet partners. Celeste looked at me with undisguised lust, but what scared me was that her husband, with the same sparkle in his eyes, was looking straight at my groin. I left shortly after that. As soon as I reached the door, her bra flew past me. I didn't look back. I took Jimmy home, and she asked me to wait in the hallway for a minute. When she called me inside, she was standing on a stool in a robe. As soon as I closed the door, she threw off her robe and stood in front of me in a white bra and slip. "Touch, touch, touch me. I want to be dirty," she sang, beckoning me closer. It was a goodbye kiss. "This is a great start, honey. It's too early to move on, but time will take care of that if you keep asking me out." I later learned, to my surprise, that that when we were lying down, we were the same height. After that, we were inseparable. 3 months later, she was living with me. 6 months later, she was wearing my ring. For her birthday, I gave her the first of her gifts, a pair of Jimmy shoes with 4-inch heels. Jimmy grinned and said that I had wasted my money but tried them on anyway. Ouch, there's something about it, she said as she shook the shoe, and the ring fell out. She just looked at it for a few seconds, then looked at me. By that time, I was already on my knees. She was quite strong for her size, knocking me off my feet as she threw herself into my arms. By the time I managed to get us both off the floor, she had already put the ring on. We got married with pomp in front of friends and family the following June, went on our honeymoon to warmer climates where we mostly went nearly without clothes, and settled into domestic bliss. I was truly happy. Jimmy loved her job, was very good at it, and I continued with my usual routine. I invested heavily in a security company when the main owner caught his wife cheating and didn't take it well. The lover's genitals were damaged, his wife suffered a permanent limp, and he was sent to a state guest house for 5 years. The business was quite successful, and I bought it at a significant discount because he urgently needed money to pay compensation to his ex-wife and cover legal fees. He had a prenuptial agreement, otherwise, she would have taken the business. The man I brought in to manage it was retired from the Army, with 15 years of experience as an inspector in the military police. I was surprised that there was little actual detective work. It was the digital age, and he assembled a group of geeks with very good skills, so most of their work required little physical presence. However, he trained them all, and they were perfect. Who would have thought that a geek with a laptop could be a threat? I was working with them, setting everything up, and it made me paranoid. If you have a digital presence at all, you're an easy target, never mind the cameras. By the time all the changes were made, only 3 original employees remained. They mainly worked with corporate clients. I had them check all the businesses in which I had shares. Jimmy didn't like it when I presented her with the marriage contract. We almost broke up over it until my lawyer and hers worked out a compromise. I put $250,000 in a trust fund and had to add 5% a year. If the marriage broke down because of my infidelity, she would get the money, and that would be it. If she was caught cheating, she would leave with nothing but what we earned together, not counting my business. It seemed like, in the end, it was more of a business deal than a marriage, but I knew neither of us would ever cheat, so they were just words written on paper that we would both forget about in time. Apparently, I was wrong. We were married for a little over 4 years. I thought life was good, we were both active, fit people with a good circle of friends. My cousin got me into whitewater kayaking. Jimmy went a few times before deciding it wasn't for her and convinced me to be careful. My cousin emphasized this: you're not invulnerable, and you can't breathe underwater. Every time we go out, you take more and more risks. You want to overcome rapids that are actually worth going around. Water has classifications for a reason, and you shouldn't go out alone. Who knows what you can do without calmer conditions nearby? You continue to take stupid risks, and I don't want to go with you anymore. I don't want to be the one to tell Jimmy that you died doing something you knew was dangerous. Jimmy became interested in local theater productions. We bought season tickets and often took friends along to enjoy something different. The 3 companies I was involved with were sponsors, as were my company and myself personally. I worked on construction sites during the summers when I was young and often helped with the construction of sets. Jimmy joined in, painting, sanding, doing everything she could to help. One evening, a few hours before the opening of a new production, one of the actresses had an accident and ended up in the hospital with a broken leg in traction. The director was on the verge of panic when his gaze fell on Jimmy. There are only 2 lines and very little movement. "Help me," he pleaded. She was scared to death the first night, it was visible on her face, but by the time the curtain closed for the last time, she was hooked. Everyone said she was a natural talent, and as she gained experience, her skills improved until she often played minor roles. The time commitment was much more than I expected, but she liked it, so I didn't complain. Eventually, though, I expressed how much I missed our time together, and she scaled back her participation, missing about every 3rd production. She became friends with many actors, and they were often guests in our house. Celeste and Jack became good friends, and although there was flirting and innuendo when we were alone, they carefully respected boundaries. However, that didn't stop us all from ending up without anything in the hot tub one evening. For bottles of wine and constant cute banter created the atmosphere. When the girls wanted to take off their tops, I shocked them all by suggesting that we all strip without clothes. Even Jack blushed when I calmly stood up and threw my swimsuit on the deck. I wasn't shy and was secretly a little pleased that I was longer than Jack. Celeste almost tried to have a night with me in the jacuzzi, and Jack got too close as I declared the night over by rising from the water and throwing a very surprised Jimmy over my shoulder. They got a great view of her fifth place as we left. "Stay as long as you want, Jimmy, and I have things to do. Just don't have a night in the jacuzzi, I just cleaned it." We reached the kitchen, and I set her down on the countertop. She was the perfect height, and soon we were at it. I turned her sideways, and there were Jack and Celeste having an intim. When it was over, Celeste stood up, turned around, and winked at me. "Good night, Jimmy." "Roy, thank you for a nice evening," she said as she led Jack to the car, carrying their clothes. I guess it was a without anything ride home. I carried Jimmy to bed, and we immediately fell asleep. We woke up a little hungover but smiled at each other. Jimmy sat drinking coffee with a thoughtful look. "Last night was interesting. I've never seen Live Night before." "It was, but I don't think we'll be inviting them into the hot tub anytime soon. I know them, and they'll take it as an invitation to cross boundaries. To emphasize my position on intimate outside of marriage, I'll say this: if you want to have fun, we'll have fun. I'm ready to move out right away. There's no going back. Understand?" Jimmy shuddered as if torn out of a dream. "Of course, dear." There was no need to say it, but it was still fun to watch and be noticed, right? It was, but it's not worth repeating. What happened was the result of too much wine and a moment of passion. She agreed, but I saw some disappointment in her eyes. A few weeks later, Jimmy returned home from a theater guild meeting, delighted. "I got the main role," she exclaimed. I knew she was excited, so I hugged her tightly and kissed her. "You can do it, but Celeste is the one to watch out for," I teased. She laughed. "Jack and Philip will take care of it." "Well, good for them. I like them, but I can't help but think that one day they'll start playing, and that will be the end. One of them will do something they can't take back. They are absolutely in love. I know it's not our way of life, but it seems to work for them, and they say it makes their night life exciting." I chuckled at her enthusiasm. "Aren't you considering this whole monogamy thing?" She blushed and smiled. "Never. I like what we have. Besides, why don't we go to the bedroom, and I'll remind you of that." "There's one problem." "Which one, dear?" "The bedroom is too far," I said playfully. We made love, and the next day, I took her to a local luxury lingerie store. This place had been in business long before anyone knew about Victoria's Secret, and their selection put the national chain in an awkward position. It was fun. We moved forward at full speed and even started discussing children. Jimmy had no siblings, and she fluctuated between wanting 3 children one day and 4 the next. I was on board with whatever number she chose. I had another project. Our favorite restaurant had closed due to poor management. The chef gave me a plan. We bought the closed restaurant, furniture and all, renovated it a little, and gathered a very good staff to help in the kitchen and an experienced owner or hostess to manage the dining area. I had invested in a restaurant early on and made a nice profit, but it closed about a year after I left. Without someone to oversee the finances or keep the chef's ego in check, things went downhill. He called, trying to get me to reinvest, but I refused. He had already damaged the reputation of the establishment too much for it to recover. Restaurants, in general, have a horrendous failure rate, and my accountants were completely against it. This time, security checked the chef, and he was clean with a very good reputation. He had already turned down 2 lucrative job offers because his wife didn't want to move, and I knew he was pitching his idea to 2 more investment groups. In the end, I decided to take a risk. I could write off most of it if it failed, but I still believed it would be a long-term success. I got the business for next to nothing. The owner was trying to earn enough to avoid bankruptcy. I owned 60% of the business, the chef contributed some money and his reputation for his 40%. As usual, I included a buyout option in the agreement, 5% per year after 2 years. The real estate company connected us with very good building contractors, and the renovation looked even better than we expected and came in on budget. Perhaps it was time to think about a construction business. Jimmy developed a very good advertising campaign, including a viral one, and on the first evening of opening, we were completely full. Dinner was free, and diners were randomly selected through an online lottery. We left a few tables for critics and journalists, who were served a selection of the best dishes. The articles and word of mouth were amazing. I tried to be there. Jack and Celeste were our guests, mainly because Celeste had a food blog. They brought their friend Philip with them, and I thought he was a little arrogant and thought too much of himself as an actor. He had appeared in several local commercials, played several small roles in films shot in the area, and took part in a 6-week guest spot on a daytime soap opera. He just couldn't understand why Hollywood wasn't knocking on his door. Despite this, he seemed harmless and was actually quite funny. It occurred to me that perhaps he had missed his calling as a stand-up comedian. His companion was Cynthia, one of the board members and the main director. She was 10 years older than Philip, and she was clearly fascinated by him. She was also married to an unforgiving man. I wondered if he knew where she was. She knew me, and more importantly, she knew my principles. I'm so glad Celeste called and asked me to fill in so that Philip wasn't a fifth wheel. With Jim gone for a week and not coming home for another 4 days, I was already climbing the walls. "It's so good to go out with friends," she said, selling it well, but it reeked of insincerity. I didn't buy it, but I remained neutral. This wasn't my problem. However, if what I suspected was true and Jim ever found out, Philip wouldn't be auditioning for leading roles anymore. His facial modifications would put him in the weird friend zone, and he'd deserve every bump he got. Celeste looked at me and smiled. She knew what I was thinking. We had become good friends, better than Jack and I could ever be, and she lived her standards openly, so I had no reason to judge. The food was great, and the conversation was stellar, apart from Philip's contributions. Celeste deliberately said things he couldn't understand and smiled when he was confused. It was playful but tinged with anger. If looks could kill, Cynthia would have laid Celeste out on the floor. Strange, but this also seemed to upset Jimmy, although she tried not to show it. It made me wonder how long it took Philip to remember his lines. After a decadent dessert served with very rich coffee, Jack and Philip suggested going clubbing to burn off some calories. I can't. I need to stay and shake some hands. Remember, Gene will be hysterical if I leave him to his fate. He can cook with the best of them, but he has no communication skills. We're working on it, I said. Celeste chimed in, I have to stay too. I need to interview the chef, get the customers' reactions, and then come back tomorrow to photograph some of the dishes and randomly film the customers. I would have done it tonight, but I wanted to enjoy dinner from the customer's point of view. You mind if we go ahead? You can catch up with us when you're done, Philip suggested. Celeste frowned at Jack, while Philip smiled. Jimmy intervened, do you mind? This way, I can get all the fast dancing out of the way, and when you come, we can just dance with each other until we get tired. We watched them leave, and Celeste turned to me, placing her hand on my arm. Everything will be okay, Roy. Nothing will happen. I just smiled. Who are you trying to convince, dear, me or yourself? She sighed. Jack has been going a little overboard lately. I thought we were really on the same page in our relationship, but now I'm starting to worry. Your life, Celeste. If you want my opinion, if it bothers you, bring it to light. Despite your lifestyle, you're a wonderful woman, and Jack is a fool if he jeopardizes what you have. You could replace him in a heartbeat, but he'll never find someone like you again. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she hugged me tightly. Gathering her strength, she smiled. If everything goes wrong and I'm free, I'll keep an eye on Jimmy like a hawk, waiting for her to make a mistake. It will never happen, but if it does, I'll be on you, Roy, and it will only be you until you drive me away. I kissed her on the cheek and told her that she would be the first one I'd contact. We carried out our duties until we completed everything that was required of us. Jack and Philip looked like they had run a marathon when we arrived at the club. Jimmy and Cynthia were still dancing on the floor, full of energy and dedication. I was surprised because I had never seen her like this. She turned around, saw me, and screamed with happiness, almost knocking me over as she jumped into my arms and kissed me. "Darling, let's go dancing," she exclaimed. The slow music started, and she pressed herself as close to me as possible, given the height difference. She looked into my eyes the entire song. When the others danced, she sat holding my hand until Celeste came over. "Let him go, honey. If he wants a good review, he should dance with the blogger," Celeste said. Jimmy giggled and pushed me toward her. We danced for about a minute before the music changed, and a slow song started. Celeste didn't miss a beat as she pressed herself close to me and rested her head on my shoulder. This continued for a couple of minutes until her head lifted, and a displeased look appeared on her face. Jack was dancing with Jimmy and was too close to her, and she didn't seem to resist much. Celeste led us over to them and pushed Jimmy toward me. "Don't be a fool, honey. Dance with your husband," she said. She grabbed Jack, and they didn't look like a happy couple. We left when the song ended. Celeste and Jack seemed to be arguing. Jimmy was silent on the way home and fell asleep when I parked the car. I thought about leaving her in the car, but love overcame anger, so I carefully picked her up and laid her in bed like a child. I was too excited to lie down, so I tried to watch Curiosity Stream until I dozed off in my chair. I woke up at 6:30 and knew I wouldn't be able to get back to sleep, so I put on the coffee and took a shower. 2 hours later, Jimmy slinked into the kitchen and grabbed a cup of coffee. We sat in silence for a while before she asked in a quiet voice, "Did I do something stupid last night?" "Define stupid," I replied. "Let me rephrase that. Did I do something that could harm our relationship?" I frowned as I collected my thoughts. "Not really, but you were close enough to the edge that the slightest push could have thrown you over. Your actions were more than borderline acceptable, at least once. If you want to leave the marriage, tell me now because I won't last much longer if you keep this up." Her reaction surprised me. She turned pale and vomited all over the kitchen table, sound no over and over again. I cleared the table, pushed Jimmy into the shower, cleaned us both up, and then put her back to bed. She didn't get up until 5 o'clock in the evening. She found me in a suit and was surprised. "I have to go back to the restaurant, remember? Celeste is coming to finish up her photos for the blog. You were supposed to come with me, but I don't think you're up to it. I have to be back by 8 o'clock this evening." I didn't give her the opportunity to object. I walked past her and left. Gene was nervous since it was his official opening. Yesterday was by invitation only, and the menu was more limited. This time, he presented a full menu and was fully booked by 10 o'clock in the morning. The kitchen was in a complete frenzy, so I stayed away until Celeste chased the cooks, waiters, and assistants out. An hour later, she returned to me, sighing as she sat down and smiled at me. "You still know how to do it, dear. This place will be another gold mine for you." I relaxed while drinking coffee, the coffee machine that the barista insisted on was worth its weight in gold. I responded with a smile. "I hope so. This is just the first step. We'll be opening 2 new locations next year, one in Atlanta and one in Jacksonville. If they work, we'll be all over the country and in Canada in 3 years. The ad guys are working on tie-ins, culinary books, personal appearances, television appearances, the whole package. Gene may have to give up his chef status a little earlier than we expected." Her eyes widened before she smiled. "You're always playing the long game, aren't you? Your investment choices always seemed random to me. It took me a couple of years to see the method in your madness. How many institutions does JOD have now?" 19, with 2 more on the way before the end of the year, and I own a part of each of them, I said, unable to hold back a smile. "Very small but very profitable shares," she remarked. "Is there anything else in the works?" "I'm looking at a couple of other possibilities, things I don't want to talk about until they're a done deal." Her smile grew wider. "I'm sure I'll read about it in the paper then." She then changed the subject. "Do you want to talk about last night?" "A little. I haven't talked to Jimmy yet. What surprises me is what we might have found if we had come an hour later. Celeste took my hand. Don't rush to conclusions. You know that Jimmy loves you. I think she just drank too much, and it clouded her judgment. Besides, you saw how happy she was when we arrived. I had to admit that she was right, but I still felt uneasy. I took my last sip of coffee. I'm going home now. Let's see what she says. Jimmy attacked me with apologies as soon as I returned home. They came one after another until I finally got her to calm down. I know you were drunk. It doesn't bother me that much. What really bothers me is that you got drunk with two idiots. Philip was all over Cynthia, a married woman, and Jack is sleeping with everything that moves. He's the type who would see you being drunk as an opportunity. I want your word that it won't happen again. Do you understand? She swore on the lives of our unborn children that it would never happen again. We went to bed, and when she touched me, I gently stopped her. You're not in shape yet, honey. I don't want half-assed intim that you're not really invested in. Let's play tomorrow. She sighed and snuggled closer to me. Do you promise? I promise. Over the next few months, when we went out, she significantly reduced her alcohol intake. The only time she allowed herself to get a little drunk was when we were alone, and she knew I would take care of her. Jimmy was an intimate dynamo under normal circumstances, but with a little alcohol, she took it to a whole new level. I suspect it had a lot to do with her actions that night, and she agreed, promising it wouldn't happen again. It takes a lot of effort to stage a live play, endless rehearsals, costume fittings, especially if the performance was historical or fantasy-themed. Small adjustments are made to adapt to the actor's capabilities. Add in sound checks, lighting adjustments, blocking off positions on stage that audiences can't see, and getting props and sets ready at short notice, all of which kept the guild on their toes until the show began. I was extremely busy with several projects, so I didn't have time to help. Everyone made me promise to come to the premiere, so I rearranged my schedule. Jimmy smiled when I showed her the t-shirt I made to wear at the premiere. It had a cute photo of her on it, and the logo said, "I'm married to a theater girl." I walked into the auditorium and was greeted by a very nervous Celeste. She was not involved in the play, her blog had taken off, and she spent a lot of time maintaining it. Sponsorships had increased, especially from the food industry, and she began filming in remote locations, organic farms, large meat processing plants, small dairies, then following the path of products from farms and factories to consumers, including grocery stores, farmers markets, and restaurants. My advertising team had been helping her, and she was now in the planning stages of a show we were going to pitch to food networks and PBS. One of my new projects was a video studio. Celeste introduced me to it, and I toured the facility, meeting with the management team. They were open about their needs. We're doing pretty well and need to expand, but unfortunately, we've reached our credit limit, and the banks don't want to finance the expansion. We have great capabilities in making videos and short films, but we have minimal business experience. Celeste thinks that we could be very useful to each other. I carefully studied the proposal and liked what I saw. The two owners had invested every cent of their personal money into a short animated film that promised to be a success. Unfortunately, they had to turn down jobs because they didn't have the opportunity. I ended up purchasing 60% of their business, paying off existing debt, and obtaining the financing needed to expand. I explained the buyout terms I had always offered, and they surprised me by asking me to wait 2 years before discussing it again. This will give us time to find someone to run the business. In the meantime, we think you will be pleased. Business was exciting. If Celeste got her show, I would become an executive producer, even if I wasn't quite sure what that meant. I smiled as I kissed her cheek. She was under a lot of stress trying to get her show off the ground, and she and Jack weren't getting along. He doesn't even seem to miss me. We haven't played with each other, much less anyone else, in quite a while. He doesn't seem to care if I'm around. This set off alarm bells. Jack was known for his love affairs. If he didn't get it at home, he'd find it elsewhere. I sympathized with her. Jimmy and I also missed quality time together. I traveled a lot, and she was busy with work and rehearsals. I was going to ask her to take a break and focus on us for a while. I'm almost done with traveling and would like to get back to talking about children. I'm 36 years old, and I want to be able to chase them when they come." Celeste smiled sadly. She and Jack had decided early on not to have children. He did the right procedure and wanted her to do the same, but she resisted. "Great news," I said, thinking I could cheer her up. "PBS and the Home and Garden Network are interested, plus the Food Network called and wants to meet us. Looks like you're going to be a star, honey." She smiled, but not as joyfully as I expected. I didn't get a chance to explain that Home and Garden wanted a standalone show focused on farms and the food industry, while PBS was leaning more towards restaurants. She may end up hosting 2 shows using material from both whenever possible. "Look, Roy, I need to prepare you. The show is about adultery and originally included a bedroom scene about cheaters having a night for the first time. I fought to get it removed and thought I had succeeded until Cynthia told me that she just brought it back into the show. Please remember it's just a play, and everyone is pretending." The way she said it made me realize that this was not going to be a pleasant experience. I was more than right. Philip played the male lead and interacted well with Jimmy. I had to wonder how hard it was for him because it seemed so natural. The final scene was them having an intimate together as a cheap motel sign flashed at the end of the stage. A spotlight illuminated a king-size bed in the middle of the room. I don't think any women in the audience were impressed by its size. Jimmy came on stage. In fact, she was almost without clothes as she slid into bed. The lights went out as they reached for each other. If they were expecting loud applause, they were mistaken. There were some sniffles, then silence, before a few hesitant spectators began to applaud. Celeste squeezed my hand and didn't let go. "Please calm down, Roy. It's just a play. It doesn't mean anything. Did you see what I saw?" "Let me go, Celeste." She tried to hold me back, but I gently bent her little finger back until she was forced to let me go or risk it breaking. She finally released me with a sigh, and I turned and headed towards the reception area where the actors usually interact with the guests. Jimmy stood between Philip and Jack, still in her dress, smiling widely. The women either didn't look at her or did so with barely concealed contempt. The men just stared. The actors were basking in praise when I stood in front of them. Jimmy's smile disappeared when she saw the expression on my face. "Put some damn clothes on," I said. She ran backstage, leaving Philip and Jack. Both of them grinned, with Philip saying, "Your wife is one hot thing." "What, Philip?" I was going to say more, but I stopped when I hit him. Jack tried to run away, but he didn't have time. "You idiot, did you think I would just stand there and do nothing?" The grin returned to Philip's face. "I don't care what you can stand." Jimmy was delighted, especially with the extra rehearsals we did to make it convincing. I was about to hit him again when everyone around me stood in horror, staring at the 2 board members. "Did you approve of this crap? To hell with you. On Monday, you will receive a letter notifying you that I am revoking my patronage, as well as the patronage of any company I am associated with." This shocked them. Between my personal patronage and that of my company, about 40% of their budget was accounted for. They would have to fight to find new sponsors, or the season would be in jeopardy. They tried to smooth things over by saying that the rehearsal they saw didn't include the bedroom scene. Just then, Cynthia burst in, screaming at the top of her lungs, "It was a play. None of this was real, you troglodyte." "Well, that changes things," I retorted. "Just because you hang around doesn't mean every woman around you should do the same. Grow up and put those worn-out breasts back in your dress. I don't think they impress guys as much as they did when you were 30. She turned pale. Her breasts were obviously supported by a very nice bra, practically poking her in the face. The worst part was the look of shock on her face. Celeste approached, gently tugging at my hand. "Roy, please calm down." I pushed her hand away. "I thought you were my friend. You could have warned me, given me a chance to stop this mess, but you didn't. You think Jack is sleeping with her, don't you? Looks like old Jack wants to play alone now and leave yours." I stopped when I saw the horror on her face. It was a pretty well-known secret in the guild, but the public didn't know about it, and I almost gave them away. "Sorry," was all I had time to say before I was knocked off my feet by a huge woman. She was clearly over 6 feet tall and weighed about 250 pounds. It felt like she tackled me to the ground, and not much of it was fat. It turned out that Philip had a wife, and what a mess that unfolded that night. She hit me, and by then the police had arrived. We were both handcuffed. Dr. Sexton mediated between Philip and Jack, and it took an hour to figure everything out. I am a local resident and have always supported the police, while Philip was an outsider, so I got the benefit of the doubt. They convinced his wife not to press charges if I let her attack me. Celeste walked away holding Jack, as slow tears streamed down her cheeks. She was the only one I felt sorry for in this terrible situation. Jimmy first appeared in a robe, surveyed the scene, and ran away, returning later in jeans and a t-shirt. Her theatrical makeup was still on her face, and she looked terrible. I think raccoons would be offended by being compared to her. She ran out of the hall crying, and I didn't see her again until the next day. I looked pretty weird walking into a 24-hour Walmart wearing only a jacket and jeans, but it was very late at night, and it was Walmart. I'm sure they've seen worse. I grabbed a couple of shirts, a pair of jeans, some underwear, and socks. I had no intention of returning home, so I stayed at a hotel in a nearby town. My phone kept ringing, so I put it in silent mode and didn't look at it until the middle of the next day. There were 30 calls from Jimmy, 5 from different board members, 1 strangely from Philip's wife, and 2 from Celeste. I listened to a few from Jimmy. They were as I expected. It was just a play. Nothing happened. You're being too dramatic. You need to get home so I can explain everything. I listened carefully, but not once did I hear an apology for what she had done. I stopped after the 8th message and deleted the rest. The calls from board members all repeated the same thing. It was just a play. They didn't know the bedroom scene had been brought back. Jack and Philip were dropped from the remainder of the season. Cynthia was asked to resign. They seemed to be trying to make things right, so I might give them a second chance. The call from that scoundrel's wife was interesting. Listen, I don't know who should be apologizing. You shouldn't have hit him that hard, and I shouldn't have attacked you. I don't think anything happened, but if it did and you have proof, I'm asking. I agree that the bedroom scene was extremely tasteless, but I think Jack and my husband were feeding off each other, and your wife was in the middle. I made it clear to him that he's done with the guild, and if he can't make enough money from acting in the next 6 months, he'll have to get a real job. He started doing the guild just to get a little more attention. At least one of them had some character. I called her back, and we had a long conversation. We didn't become friends, but we didn't become enemies either. The conversation with Celeste was a little more difficult. When she answered, I started talking so she couldn't get a word in edgewise. Listen, I'm sorry about last night. I was very upset, and maybe I went too far. Your lifestyle is your business as long as it doesn't affect me. I appreciate you very much, but you have some decisions coming up where I don't think Jack will be involved. If I see him anytime soon, he'll probably get another hit. I'd rather you didn't cut me out of your life, but if necessary, I'll understand. When I stopped talking, there was silence. Then she began, You've hurt me, Roy. In all the time I've known you, you've never once spoken out directly against my lifestyle. Jack can be a jerk and sometimes goes too far. He should never have brought back that bedroom scene. I suspect he only did it to make you angry. He feels threatened by you, Roy. You're smarter than him, much more successful, but what scares him the most is your size. He's convinced, his words, not mine, that one day you'll have a night with me and spoil me. I couldn't help but laugh. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm not that big, and Jack isn't that small. And just so you know, I would never have intimate with you. If we were dating, I'd make love to you like you deserve, and then if we continued, we'd have an intim. I can't imagine it being anything less than great. I felt her blush. I have to go. Call me later when you want to discuss show options. At least one bridge had been restored. Jimmy was a different story. I called her and didn't give her a chance to speak. Home. 6 o'clock, you better come with a clear head and don't lie. If I catch you in a lie, I'll leave, and everything will be over. If I find out that you cheated on me, the marriage contract will come into force. I won't show any mercy. When I arrived, she was sitting on the sofa. I was pleased to see that she had not been drinking. We both needed a clear mind to deal with this. I raised my hand. I would like to talk and ask a few questions first, if you don't mind. Knowing how organized she is and how her brain works, I'm sure she had made a plan and thought of everything about how to present it. Spin doctors don't like being put in a reactive situation. What I did threw the script out the window. Who chose the play you presented? Jack. But when you read it, especially the bedroom scene at the end, did you think it was appropriate for a provincial audience? She looked a little confused. Jack said it would be good for the city, to get people out of their comfort zone and expand their horizons. And you agreed? Not right away, but Jack and Philip said. Ah, words from the fountain of knowledge and morality, I interrupted. Jimmy was now blushing. Can I say something? She asked. Yes. It was incredibly stupid and completely inexcusable. The guild received many calls after that night, and none of them were flattering. So far, 17 season subscribers have demanded their money back, and 2 more corporate sponsors have withdrawn their support. This could be the end of local theater. I'm sorry if I can't sympathize with them much. Please, Roy, she continued, you don't have to forgive Jack, Philip, or even me, but you love that theater. Think twice before you destroy it, they may never come back. She was right, but at that moment, I didn't care. Did you sleep with them? No. Have you thought about it? Did your rehearsals ever get out of control? Look me in the eye and tell me nothing inappropriate happened. And most of all, tell me why you thought I wouldn't care if you walked out practically without anything on stage and then took part in that scene without clothes? She cried a lot, and instead of comforting her, I just waited for her to calm down. Jack didn't tell me until the very last moment that the bedroom scene was back on the program. He and Philip gave me a nightgown and promised that no one would see anything because they would darken the lights before I went on stage. Then Jack just pushed me onto the stage, and I had no choice. I see. The play must go on. Let me ask you, when he said the bedroom scene was back on, why didn't you tell them to go to hell and refuse to do it? When Jack pushed you, you could have just backed down. You know what I think? I think you decided why not, even though you knew it would embarrass me and make me very angry. Even then, if you had worn a robe, I might have forgiven you for doing something. But no, you walked out there practically without clothes. I stopped. Jimmy screamed, a primal scream, and rushed toward me, begging and crying at the same time. I just held her until she fell asleep. I sat for a while, feeling her deepen in my embrace, her grip never weakening. Did I still love her? Yes, I did. Did I think I could forgive what she did? Maybe. The next morning, she woke up to the smell of coffee. I was at the table when she walked in wearing one of my old t-shirts, her silky black hair tousled. She had never looked more attractive to me. She took the cup and started talking. She spoke for half the morning, and a lot became clearer. She was afraid to have children. She was jealous of Celeste, and Jack fueled that jealousy by telling her that it was okay for him if I slept with his wife, and he would be happy to reciprocate. Philip joined in, telling her how cute she is and that she deserves better. She swore there was no night between them. It shocked me when she said that since we fell in love, she always woke up with the thought that I was about to realize I was married to a small, half-breed foreigner with the breasts of a little girl and almost no fifth place, which I needed to get rid of. It was a long road back. We went to consultations together, and I went to another therapist. I could understand how it could have happened given her mood and falling into the hands of a couple of successful predators, but I still thought that her love for me and common sense should have prevailed. No wonder the theater guild almost collapsed. There were no more performances that season, the last 3 plays were cancelled. Cynthia got divorced. It was pretty ugly, and Philip was named in a lawsuit for alienation of affection. He had nothing to lose, so Cynthia's husband told him that if he admitted to having an intimate with Cynthia, he would drop the lawsuit. Being the gentleman he is, Philip threw her under the bus and sang like a nightingale. Philip's wife, and, ashamed and tired of her husband's infidelities, divorced him. He had the audacity to ask for child support because he was unemployed. The judge laughed when his lawyer suggested it. You have a degree and some experience, Mr. Lawson. The job market is hot right now, so I have no doubt that you'll find a position quickly. Application denied. Almost a year later, I received a visit from Celeste and the new board of directors of the old theater guild. If Celeste hadn't asked in person, I would have told them to kiss my 5th place. I was not inclined to bear a grudge, and many promises were made about control of both materials and personnel. They almost begged me to accept a seat on the board of directors. Celeste approached me personally, so I agreed and helped prepare for the new season, which included many children's plays. I was even in one, playing a cow in the children's version of Into the Woods. I was delighted, and the local critics said I stole every scene I was in. However, my theatrical activities were limited to this because work at that time was quite demanding. Celeste was appointed artistic director, carefully selecting productions and directing most of them. This made her happy. Celeste tried for months before she simply gave up and divorced Jack. He didn't like it, and it got to the point where she had to threaten to get a restraining order if he didn't leave her alone. She and I spent a lot of time together on business, and I tried my best to console her. I insisted that she spend more time with me, and she often traveled with me when I traveled on projects, especially when it came to Celeste. I think it was half envy and half admiration for how television worked. Celeste signed a deal with the Food Network for 13 episodes, visiting restaurants primarily in the Southeast. In one episode, she was in California, and in another, she was in Vancouver. We didn't go to California with her but turned the trip to Canada into a vacation. Celeste met with one of the crew members, a senior producer, and the 4 of us had a great time. We had 2 suites at one of the top hotels, and ours had a hot tub. One night, after a few drinks, we shocked the hell out of her new man by stripping off and getting into the bathtub. Celeste and George didn't seem in a hurry, and I smiled, remembering the last time we were in the bath together. Once again, they got a very nice view of the ice gemas. I carried her into the bedroom. Jimmy accompanied Celeste because she was the publicist in charge of her career, and she did it brilliantly. An offer came from Home and Garden for another show that we proposed, and we agreed. Celeste will do 10 shows a year for them and 20 for the Food Network, leaving her about 10 weeks a year for vacations and personal appearances. The remaining weeks will be her time to relax. There was even talk of a book or 2 as companion material. The production company flourished. The guys finished an animated short film that they had been working on for a couple of years, and it was nominated for an Oscar. It didn't come close to winning, but it brought them a lot of recognition and job offers. Deciding that I had done all I could for them, I looked for another project. After a few months, Jimmy came to me looking as nervous as a Boy Scout minister on his way to the pulpit. "Can I ask you something?" "No," I said. She looked stunned. Well, that was a stupid question, so I thought I'd give a stupid answer. "What's on your mind?" "Please listen to me before you say anything. I would like to act in amateur productions again, not in our city. God knows they don't even like me being in the audience." "No, in Jamesville. They're starting a theater guild, and I'd like to be a part of it." Jamesville was a small town 15 miles away. I think the whole city had less than 5,000 people. I thought about it for a minute. "I don't really like it," I said. "Welcome, dear. They're only planning on doing 3 plays this year. They desperately need someone with experience. You could join too. You're not very busy right now. It could be fun for both of us." "Do they know about the last play you were in?" She blushed a little as she answered, "No, and I'd prefer it not come up in conversation." "Please, Roy, I miss it. I missed the piece I had before, but I didn't say it out loud. Let's meet them and see what happens." She expressed her gratitude 3 times that night. This hadn't happened for a long time. Good thing I didn't have morning meetings. The next day, we had a meeting with them. They seemed nervous and inexperienced. Their leader was a local high school English teacher and drama director. He had a degree in drama but had to take what he could get after graduating from college. He had appeared in several off-Broadway productions and spent the summer touring with a road company producing Oklahoma. He sighed. "It's kind of a dream for me. I lived in a big city before moving here and was deeply involved in the theater guild there. I talked to some of my old friends, and they encouraged me to do it, even offering to give me some of their old materials. My school students are excited, and some of us have drama backgrounds, but the rest are just housewives, production workers, or office workers who have no idea what they are getting themselves into. Some will quit when they see how much time they have to devote. Some will leave because it's not what they expected. The rest of us will just carry on. I appreciated his honesty. I also appreciated that they seemed to be mostly moral people and not prone to anything provocative. Have you ever seen the production of Unlawful Affair? Bob, the teacher, made a face. Yes, I did. It was pretty bad, and the audience didn't like it. Unpleasant subject was the most common comment. They did one show and closed. Was there a bedroom scene in it? Hell no. I've never heard of anyone who had the courage to leave it in. If you're asking if we're going to do something like that, the answer is a resounding no. It's a small town, farmers, workers, factory workers, and that's not something they'll like. I like this guy, I said. What do you think of our story today? I don't think the wife should have agreed to this skit. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.